Today I am unboxing and testing out a very special set of paints. It's the Ali Cavanaugh Portrait Set of Colors by QOR Watercolors. I think the reason I'm so stoked about these is that Ali Cavanaugh is one of my watercolor idols. She's one of the best portrait artists out there, and she's just a wonderful, amazing person. I had the privilege of meeting her earlier this year at the Portrait Society of America conference. She was actually on faculty for the first time this year, did an amazing demo at the Face Off event, and actually spoke on a panel with my other watercolor hero, Mary White, during a breakout session where she talked about overcoming obstacles in your life. It was just so good. So if you don't know Ali Cavanaugh's work, you must check her out. She's got a huge following on Instagram, and of course she has her own set of QOR paints. She paints exclusively on clay boards or aqua boards. She calls her paintings modern frescoes. The cool thing about aqua board or using watercolor ground on a surface is that it has the potential to do so many cool things with the watercolor that paper really cannot do. So I'm going to be testing out her paint set today along with the QOR Watercolor cold pressed ground. The watercolor ground can be used on any surface to prepare it for watercolor painting. That opens up a whole realm of possibilities when it comes to surfaces. You don't have to just work on paper when you're painting with watercolor. So today it's just a 6-inch circle panel with a nice wide cradled edge, and I'm going to be using this for a portrait painting today using the QOR set of watercolors by Ali Cavanaugh. I've prepared it with 3 coats of this cold pressed ground. Now you might be asking, what's the difference between this and normal watercolor ground? Well, it actually has a gritty texture to it that's really similar to your cold pressed paper. QOR also makes just a regular watercolor ground, and it's just going to be a slightly smoother surface than the cold pressed. So we'll see how this goes. I have never used either the QOR watercolor ground or the Ali Cavanaugh set, so all brand new things, but I like to put myself in these situations, so what can I say? Before we start, I'm going to unbox the paints and check out the colors and do some mixes with them so I can get a feel for all the different capabilities and mixing possibilities with this set of colors. It is just 6 colors. We've got nickel azo yellow, pyrrole orange, Perylene Crimson, Sap Green, Ultramarine Turquoise, and Payne's Gray. This set was very carefully curated by Ali. She worked with the QOR team to come up with the most perfect set for her portraits. As you can see on the insert here, you can use these colors for any skin tone. Just 6 colors to make a luminous life. I love that. So there's Ali. Isn't she beautiful? Payne's Gray is the dark value. You're going to have your ultramarine turquoise. It says it's Ali's signature color, perfect for underpaintings, and the best blue for cool sunlight on all flesh tones. Sap Green is effective when mixed with Perylene Crimson for warm shades of flesh tones. So if you actually mix your green and your red, you're going to get a deep, rich brown. Isn't that gorgeous? Pyrrole Orange captures the translucent glow of light passing through delicate areas such as the ears, nose, and eyes of a well-lit portrait. Nickel Yellow Azel combined with the Pyrrole Orange creates fresh, bright skin tones and light to fair complexions. And it says Perylene Crimson is the perfect deep shade of luscious red for crevices in the lips, ears, nostrils, and eyes. You can tell that she really thought through all of these colors and all of their different uses in any kind of portrait situation. Let's try these out. For those of you who are unfamiliar with QOR watercolors, they are unique because they have a binder called Aquazol, which is different from the more traditional gum arabic. Aquazol is a highly water-resoluble substance typically used in conservation retouching, so it's been used for a while and it's a tried and tested product. Gum arabic, which is used in most watercolors, when isolated has a golden amber color, whereas Aquazol is colorless, which helps support the most vibrant and high chroma colors. Aquazol can also hold a higher pigment load. To ensure longevity and quality, QOR chooses pigments that are known for high light fastness, but the manufacturer also does rigorous light-fast testing with QUV and xenon machines before products are brought to market. Gum arabic tends to get brittle over time, while Aquazol remains flexible, but without the stickiness that you'd see in watercolors made with honey. If you watch my channel, you know I love my Daniel Smith and Holbein paints, and because I usually paint on watercolor paper, I don't worry about the paint flaking off. But if, like Ali Cavanaugh, you're working on alternative surfaces, such as aqua boards or surfaces prepped with watercolor ground, the paint does not soak into the fibers, and you definitely want to use a paint that will not flake off over time. QOR watercolors, with their flexible and archival Aquazol binder, are the best choice for this. I wanted to try to follow Ali's methodology a little bit here in this painting. She usually starts with her ultramarine turquoise as an underpainting for the most luminous and realistic skin tones, so that's what I began with. Now, next I tried to mix up a purple. This is actually the only real issue I had with this set, was that I could not mix up a true violet. I tried using the Perylene Crimson, a little bit of the Payne's Gray, some of the ultramarine turquoise, and the perylene crimson, and I just couldn't get a true violet. It's not necessarily an issue. You can actually change the colors from the reference photo, which is what I ended up doing. But I ended up with kind of a grayish purple for the shirt and a first layer in the hair. I used a little bit of the nickel azo yellow in the hair to create the illusion of that blonde hair in the shadow. And then I started my first wash on the skin. For this, I used some of that pyrrole orange, a really light, watery wash. This is the first time I've used this surface too, so I was struggling a bit with technique on the surface, noticing some bubbling happening. And remember that with a surface prepped with watercolor ground, the paint is not going to soak in. It just kind of sits there on the surface. So this was something I struggled with initially. I'm beginning to understand why Ali uses such tiny brushes. You can get so much more control that way. So I did block in a shadow along the ear and under the jawline and some initial washes of color on the hair. I noticed immediately you just can't use too much water on the surface or you're going to end up with tons of blooms. Now Ali 100% embraces that in her artwork. She does a lot of backwash and blooms in the skin even, but I really didn't want that on this portrait, and I was frustrated with this first wash on her face because I was seeing some of those hard lines and puddle effects in the head, so I ended up wiping it completely out. Now this is one huge advantage to using this surface. You can completely wipe it clean to the white of the surface, unlike paper where you're going to get some staining and a little bit of that effect where the paint soaks in. With watercolor ground on board, you can remove it 100%. So this is kind of awesome for those of you who are worried about mistakes with watercolor. This should be a really freeing thing when it comes to what surface you use. You can see just how clean I got that again. So while that was drying so I could come back at it again a second time, I decided to work on the hair. Now blonde hair has so much color in it. It's really amazing. You can put blues, reds, greens, oranges, yellows, all kinds of color in that hair and still make it look like blonde hair. Now my challenge here was, since I couldn't create a true violet, how could I create the effect of violet or what looks kind of like purple without actually using the color? So to do this, I laid down some of the pyrrole orange, some of the perylene crimson, and a mix of black using multiple colors side by side with some of the turquoise and the Payne's Gray. And then in the shinier portions of the hair, I used just a little hint of that nickel azo yellow. And you can see we kind of get the effect of violet without actually using it. I was super happy with how the hair turned out. I stuck with really small brushes for this entire painting. Again, this is what Ali does. She uses really teeny tiny brushes, and I'm beginning to understand why. With this surface, you can get so much more control when you're using less water, and because tiny brushes don't hold very much water at all, you're going to get more control with that. All right, now for my second attempt with the skin. I was a little more careful here. I did not start with the turquoise under wash anymore. This time I just went in with the pyrrole orange, tiny hint of the nickel azo yellow mixed in, and just tried to get as flat of a wash as I could. Even with that, you can see it was still a tiny bit blotchy. Now I did want to add a hint of the blue for the most luminous skin tone. So this is always a little scary when you cross over it with more colors. Are you going to get tons of backwash, tons of blooms? But I managed to pull off a relatively smooth surface here. If you do enough brush work over the top, you can smooth it out quite a bit. And then a little bit more crimson and pyrrole orange to darken the neck. Now, as it was beginning to dry, I could start doing detail work. I switched to a teeny tiny little Arteza brush for the details of the eyes, nostrils, and lips. And honestly, this is the brush that I used for the majority of the painting. This larger brush here is still really small. It's a size 4 Princeton Neptune brush. So finally, I was able to get a pretty decent skin tone, but it was still a bit blotchy. So I asked myself, what if I used a cross-hatching technique like I've been doing with my pen drawings lately? So I switched to an even tinier Kolinsky Sable brush, which is a really soft, wonderful brush that you can use to control lots of edges. And I decided to start doing this teeny tiny cross-hatching technique, which is what I ended up using for the majority of the skin. And I was really happy with the result. I was able to get the appearance of super smooth skin using these tiny side-by-side brush strokes. And then if you needed to smooth them out, then you just go the opposite direction and you end up with the illusion of really smooth skin. Here's that Kolinsky Sable brush again I was using for details in the hair, and then switching back to that Arteza brush for little bits of cross hatching to very subtly darken the skin. You can see I was really working with the texture of the surface here, using almost a dry brush technique and scraping the paint across the surface. For the background, this was actually the fastest part of the painting. I just did lots of blobs using the nickel azo yellow and the ultramarine turquoise to create green. And I wanted to create the effect of bokeh, so I left some little circles untouched with the paint. And then again, there's the advantage of being able to lift paint back out. So if you want, you can always just take a damp brush and scrub out those circles. I finished up the hair again using my really tiny brush, working with small details. For little stray hairs, I decided to leave that to the end. You can use a tiny brush, wet the surface, and then just take a dry piece of paper towel to lift those hairs back out. No scraping necessary, really. I loved the jewel tones I was able to get in her curly hair here, just using a combination of the yellow, turquoise, red, and some of the Payne's gray to deepen up those shadows underneath the hair. Overall, this painting took quite a while, about 4 hours, which is a long time for me because I was not able to use my typical more shortcut style with wet and wet, but I was really happy with it and ended up feeling super excited to try this technique in more future paintings. I wanted to continue experimenting with this set since I was having so much fun with these colors. I decided to create 4 more small portrait paintings, this time on my paper. So I was able to use more of my typical wet and wet techniques for smooth skin, but I started with those blue undertones. This is a medium dark skin tone, and I had no issues at all matching my reference photo as far as color and value. For this male portrait with fair skin, I did a wash of pyrrole orange, and while it was still wet, dropped in some of that turquoise for the beard, and just worked in layers as I usually do, wet and wet, to create soft blends in the shadows. To create brown, Ali uses a combination of the Perylene Crimson and Sap Green, and that worked really well for the shadows and for the hair. In this little portrait of Angelina Jolie, again, I used those same combinations. I noticed that with most of the portraits that I was playing with in this selection, I didn't really use the yellow too much. So in the future, I would love to play with more skin tones that have yellow in them. I think that would be fun to experiment some more with that. In summary, I think I can say with complete confidence that you can indeed paint any skin tone, any value with this set of 6 colors. The only thing I was kind of missing was the ability to create a true violet, but other than that, it was a great set. Wow, I loved this set so much. Thank you, Ali, for letting me try your set. I adore your work. I adore your colors. This one's for you. And thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.